my absolute pleasure as the Executive Secretary of CABRI to welcome you today. I think Priya had already indicated that we have a new strategic plan that we're just embarking upon as CABRI, and our pleasure then is to introduce a new area of work for us, which is on digital PFM. So we're very happy to be here today. And in terms of who CABRI is, I think you clearly saw, we are the Collaborative Africa Budget Reform Initiative, and we value the collaborative and cooperative work that we do together across the continent. So what we're going to do today is start on our journey with digital PFM as countries from Africa. We're going to talk more specifically today to IFMIS and some of the issues around IFMIS, but we go beyond that in terms of the digital PFM platform and discussions for budget reform. I'd like at this stage specifically to say thank you very much to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for funding this work, which is really needed and which we really appreciate. What we're going to ask from participants is that in the future and as we go along, you provide us with your inputs, insights, so that together we can craft the most important way in which we can do our work on this topic, which will assist all of us. Next slide, please. So CABRI is an international organization, an independent organization, which is comprised of member countries in Africa. There are 17 countries currently, which are CABRI members, and we are looking forward to having more members across the continent. So please, if you want more information on how to join and the benefits of CABRI, please do contact us. We're specifically focused on Ministry of Finance work and on supporting ministries of finance, both in terms of their systems, but also in terms of their capabilities development. So we look forward to an extended and growing CABRI as we express our strategic plan going forward. I also want to remind you that Priya had indicated that we are recording this session. And so I think as we have our discussions today, you will probably think of one or two colleagues, perhaps from other divisions in the Ministry of Finance, that you would want to share our recording with as well. Essentially, we have worked on many areas. You see some of them displayed there in front of you. And we constantly evolve. We're introducing a new area of work today. And we also look at the way in which we approach particular topics differently and may group them differently as we go forward. We're not the guidelines people, so we're not here. The end that we seek in terms of our work is not to have guidelines which have step-by-step requirements for any particular country, nor are we here to write academic articles about PFM. We may do some of those things if it's meaningful, but most importantly, we're focused on the praxis, on what actually works and why it works. And we seek to learn from each other as we look at that. Next slide, please. So in terms of digital PFM, we have done some work on IFMISs historically as CABRI, so you are welcome to pick that up also on the website. Although today we're going to talk about IFMIS, and certainly we'll do so in some detail, we are going to look at going beyond IFMIS in terms of this digital PFM initiative, fully cognizant of the fact that ministries of finance have a high order mandate, which goes beyond just having an accounting system in place, which is digital. We also know that this IFMIS must link up to your other budget reform initiatives and other systems. And what we do in this regard, or will do in this regard as we work together, is use our CABRI approach, which we're sure has results in terms of our past evidence. It's called the problem-driven iterative adaptation. So we will ensure that the work we do focuses on some of the challenges, problems, or issues that one faces in terms of the functionality of your PFM systems and your PFM reforms, with the belief that the form or the format of the changes will follow on the actual function, which is where we must focus. We're interested in it being iterative and adaptive. So we seek to learn then from yourselves and others, and I know within the countries you'll also do further work about what works, both in terms of technical systems, but maybe most importantly, in terms of the capabilities of people, including the interface with politics, but also, as we all know, in this domain, if we're talking about IFMIS, we're talking about IT technological experts, we're talking about PFM experts, and others. So we all need to learn together. In the end, what we're trying to drive is a population solution, which means that our ministries of finance are best able to use the public purse for the benefit of country citizens. Next slide, please. So digital PFM has a lot of potential, and digital PFM has a very wide scope. In terms of IFMIS specifically, for starters, and I'm sure most countries have started, your IFMIS will allow one to do administrative recording and reporting of transactions quicker and faster. Your IFMIS will also allow, in some cases, faster decision making, because information reaches decision makers that are on the front line in real time. So I think the question that we would all ask is, in terms of digital PFM, how do we make the IFMIS even better? How does the IFMIS link to what we're doing on our other budget reform platforms? But next slide, please. Even though we would ask those questions about how we pull all these broad digital reforms together, including IFMIS, there's also lots of evidence that some of the digital reforms have failed. You'll see there's some extracts from the media, and essentially some of the reasons regarding why historically these big systems might have failed. One of them being that what was being sought was modernization, and we're hoping to find a way in which we modernize but look at functionality. The other reason could be looking at change management processes, and perhaps those didn't properly address reservations that the people who must administer the systems might have. And also perhaps misunderstandings of implementing the systems. Lastly, of course, the most important thing about how we make sure that over time, the people that would be in charge of administering the system and those that would be using the data are able to continue to do so in a meaningful way. So we really seek to speak to each other, because across Africa, we do spend a lot of time, effort, and money on initiatives such as this. And we really do want to learn the lessons with each other so that we can more expediently implement solutions that help us in our budget reform initiatives for our country and more broadly for the continent. Next slide, please. This is just a quick reminder of the PDIA approach that we use. You can see by the headings what the key elements thereof are. But we also have indicated in the blocks some of the reasons why this doesn't happen so easily. So, for example, when big systems are planned, there might be a trap of planning them too linearly and assuming that you just follow them step by step. Legacy systems, of course, have always existed, and how to bring them in, modernize them. These are the kinds of issues that we need to be aware of in order to manage our budget reforms. We also have mentioned some others here, for example, making sure that what is implemented suits the local context best and that the design fits the purpose that you need in your country at that specific point in time. We have some exciting panelists who will also talk to some of the potential pitfalls of IFMIS implementation and, of course, some of the benefits. Next slide, please. So for today's seminar, without much further ado, I have an absolute pleasure to launch our work in Digital PFM. I have no doubt that we're going to work together very constructively, collaboratively, and make sure that we have some learnings and lessons which will take us forward in terms of our PFM development across the continent and enable us to become a voice in PFM internationally as well. In terms of the work that is done within the CABRI Secretariat, I'd like to introduce then and hand over to Giselle Hadley, who is the program manager that will be dealing with the Digital PFM work. And a thank you again to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for funding this work. I'm going to hand over now to Giselle Hadley from our Public Finance Division. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kay Brown, for those important insights into why we're here, really, and why CABRI is interested in expanding our work within the digital PFM space. So, as Dr. Brown mentioned, really today we're here to introduce some ideas for what we're thinking about doing in this work and to get feedback. So we are a collaborative organization and we want our countries to provide input into what do they need and what do they want to see CABRI doing. So the structure of today's webinar, now that the welcome message and the introduction is finished, we're going to move on to a presentation on some of the common challenges that digitalization faces. So why is it so difficult to be successful in digital reforms? We'll also have 3 countries speaking in a panel about their experience with IFMIS. IFMIS isn't the only part of digital PFM, but it is a place where we have a lot of experience as a continent and have an opportunity to learn from what works. And then finally, I will present the new initiative and the layout that will take and open up for some feedback for that so that we can be shaping that together. If we go to the next slide, I'll present on some of the people that you'll hear from today and also some of the people who are working behind the scenes to make this webinar successful. So of course, you've already heard from Dr. Kay Brown. We also have Priya and Ashani who are working very hard in the background to make sure that this webinar is well attended and that you all got the right invites and that you are able to hear things in the correct languages. So thank you to them for all of the hard work in advance. Also, Joanna is our acting head of technical, so she has been helping on the content and shaping this work over the last few months. And then finally, we have brought on board Nicholas Botton, who you're going to hear from next, who is bringing a huge amount of wealth of experience into from the sector into the CABRI team on a short-term basis. So we really appreciate his support and insights. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nicholas to talk a little bit about the challenges that countries face in implementing digital reforms.
Thank you very much, Giselle. Next slide, please. As was just explained, and next again, please. We're not looking for a lecture type presentation. The idea is here to get some feedbacks and inputs from you to try to tailor the future research as was just explained. But we need to acknowledge the existing many research conclusions and papers and the work that has been done before. And one of the key conclusions we thought we wanted to share with you before we started asking the panelists what they think about it is the digital reforms come in many shapes and sizes in the different countries. What we pretty much all agree upon is we always start with automation, so digitize before digitalize. That's one of the terms that have been put forward by a research paper by I think it was Government Information Systems in 2019 that is just mentioned here. And the idea is that we all start with having a system that just puts into a digital world what we're actually doing with paper. So we're just introducing the same version of the process in a system, and not providing new services. Many ways that uses simple tools, and that's already saying something. I mean, reaching this stage is already an important one, because in many cases the expenditure chain, the revenue chain is still very much based on paper. Then we try to go to digitalizing and to really enhance the existing process, and that's where we have this issue of having a central vision of the numbers, and where we have all this data reliability issue, and a lot of the questions we're going to ask our panelists today is about how can we converge this central vision, which requires some common views about data and common data governance and flexibility, and this PDIA approach, this adaptive approach, because we need to adapt to the local context and to the local actors, but we also need to have some rules, especially with data. And that includes not only central government but local authority, and then we have full digital transformation, which is what we're all looking for, and it includes really an effort on our side to revise all the government core processes, and to try to question how new services can be provided, how new communication methods can be implemented. For example, we have a lot of research about chatbots right now, especially in fiscal reporting, and new platforms for data exchange. I know we tend to say we start from the objective, the PFM objective, and then we look for the technology. But the truth is, we often have technologies also questioning ourselves and our processes, and we try to see how we can include them. So a lot of research has been done in this on how to have this, how to tackle this huge challenge. And a recent paper by OECD was just released, showing that it's not just the CABRI members or the members of the countries in the continent, but that's probably an issue for every country in the planet. And I believe we have some people from OECD joining today. I think they would agree that this is a common challenge for everyone. Next slide, please. So the scope of government is also expanding, and digital government is also expanding. And as we just said, it's not just improving the IFMIS that we're working on, it's really turning everything we do in Ministry of Finance into a digital version of it. So basically, one of the issues we see with the digital transformation is how to go from a work on IFMIS to a work toward digitalizing the whole PFM process, and not just within the Ministry of Finance. So we're not going to go through definitions. We're all the members are pretty much, I think, knowledgeable about what an IFMIS is. But we still need to agree that an IFMIS is something that provides what is often defined as the core functions of PFM, and it's used to both generate and use the financial system for reporting. And this system does not answer all the needs that we have for our population, for example, in terms of transparency, reporting, etc. Also, what we see very much is that we cannot have this IFMIS, cannot view this IFMIS in a linear planning view, because we are constantly confronted to the unexpected. So what we have to do is constantly go back to the decision makers, to the civil servants, to the citizens, and try to include their needs, their new needs, which are evolving into our projects, and not just limiting this to budget and accounting data, but making it wider, including data from broader sources, and encompassing not just the Ministry of Finance, but obviously line ministries, local authorities, and public companies, and beyond. Next slide, please. All of us are now, or virtually all of us, are now involved in projects that include those technologies that are presented here. And again, it's impossible not to implement them in our projects. We are all confronted to those questions that RPA, robotic process automation, government as a platform, cloud and SaaS, advanced BI, machine learning, satellite imaging are posing to us. And the idea is, how can we better serve our PFM processes and objectives? The mistake here would be obviously to try to implement these technologies just for the sake of it, or for the beauty of it, for the art. But the truth is, well implemented, those technologies have an impact on all our processes, as I said earlier. And if you look at current studies performed in the continent, as I said, pretty much all of us have ongoing studies or ongoing projects with those technologies. And around all those technologies, there are two aspects we wanted to stress. One is, at the center of it, there's always data. So none of this works if you don't have reliable data. That's pretty much obvious, but maybe it needs to be reminded. So when you have different sources of data and they don't concur and they don't agree with each other, then there's pretty much nothing you can build upon it. So you have to start with reliable data and data governance, and that means enforcing rules. And around all those technologies, there's also another game changer, which is artificial intelligence. And the way we see it, artificial intelligence is actually impacting all those technologies. So pretty much all your digital projects, everything you are trying to implement, either in the IFMIS, in the scope of IFMIS or beyond, is impacted by artificial intelligence. So you can't really ignore that. And actually no one is. So the problem is to use those technology and in a wider vision of what we want to obtain by a digital government, basically. Next slide, please. So we're not going to talk today in details about all the potential impediments, obstacles that you may need. We're going to ask the panelists basically what they have encountered, and what we understood from talking to them beforehand was obviously there are technical and practical challenges. Quality of data is absolutely key. We have multiple systems being built, as Giselle just mentioned before, and Dr. Brown before that, we are all surrounded by legacy systems, so we all have the as is to deal with. But we are also required to find new skills for new systems, as the new technologies I just mentioned are posing new challenges to us. And those resources are very difficult to find everywhere. Everyone, it's always difficult to find an expert in machine learning or government as a platform or whatever. So we all have difficulties trying to find the right resources. The way we are funding this project is also a question that we will ask our panelists, and the way we are procuring these projects too. Obviously, we're being asked to be adaptive, iterative, modular. There's a lot of research about that. I actually contributed to some, but in practical terms, we are all going through public tenders, and they have their constraints. And we don't buy in the public sector as we do in the private sector, and we do have also donor funding. As you know, these are very much under constraint, and they have to have clear objectives and milestones that have to be precise. So how do you implement that in an iterative or adaptive or modular approach? That's the question we're going to ask them. Also, the digital literacy is not just limited to those involved in the project, but it goes beyond to whoever is involved in the digital transformation. And finally, we want to insist on institutional, legal, and cultural barriers. I mean, obviously, we need to do things in the digital world that are in compliance with your legal and regulatory constraints. You can't ask a public accountant to accept a digital document if it's not written somewhere in regulation, and you also have to make sure he's trained to use this new digital document. That's something that takes time, and resistance to change has been one of the key comments from everyone about how to make these digital projects successes, and they are often described as the key reason why they are not, basically. So all of this means that we have to face a new job, basically, for the Ministry of Finance. We are encompassing many new challenges. Next slide, please. This is actually the last one. And this does not mean that you don't have to do the previous jobs you were already doing. I mean, we all keep our current jobs at Ministry of Finance. I used to work for the Ministry of Finance in France for many years, and I have seen how there's more and more being asked to the teams. So basically, yes, it presents huge potentials for our Ministry of Finance professions, and I would say beyond that, for the PFM professionals, not just in the Ministry of Finance, but in the line ministries, in the public companies, in the public entities as a whole, but also to our citizens. So we need to improve for example, the fiscal transparency, and this is something where we turn to the Ministries of Finance and we say, you are the digital champion for that. So please do this. But this is a new job, and this is a job where we also have to start with a very complex environment. All these legacy systems we have to deal with, and that have to evolve. A study from the World Bank has shown that implementing a new IFMIS in the continent takes about 6 to 7 years. So obviously, in the meantime, you need to have your existing systems to evolve. So all of this is complex and risky. But we wanted to insist on success stories too. I mean, there's a reason why we're all doing this, and it's not just focus on failures. We have to have good successes in mind too, and we need to share between us the lessons learned. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to ask the panelists how they face those unexpected challenges, and the lessons they learn, and maybe that can be shared with you and useful to you, how they evaluated impacts and how they invented new ways, basically. So it's a new job with new tools. There's a lot of talks about a new paradigm. I just quoted an OECD mentioned in the state of the art in the use of technology paper that says that the paradigm shift is essential to adopt basically a new approach to this digital transformation. That's not just in PFM, that's in the public sector. The public sector is undergoing a complete shift toward digital, and the Ministry of Finance has to be the digital champion of digitalizing PFM. So a difficult challenge, but we're going to see that in many cases it can be a success, and we're going to turn to the panelists for that. So next slide, please, and I'm handing over the floor to Giselle.
Thank you, Nicholas. And if we go to the next slide, I think as Nicholas explained, and I say, as we all probably know, implementing digital reforms is challenging. There's a lot of obstacles that we'll face along the way. And while I think often we as governments will set out a plan in advance and set out the steps that we want to take, the reality is much messier, like the picture shows. And as Dr. Brown said in the beginning, at CABRI, we believe in this problem-driven, iterative adaptation approach to PFM reform, and digital reform is no different. So this means that endpoint, that flag at the end, needs to be well defined in terms of what we're trying to achieve. In the digital space, we're usually not just trying to digitalize, but we're trying to use a digital solution to improve our systems and ultimately to achieve better results for our people. The other thing that this PDIA approach sets out is how do we have systems that respond to obstacles when we reach them? So how do we overcome a challenge without losing focus? And this could be about having the right approval from senior leadership and their involvement, or fixing an administrative barrier that is preventing progress. And so knowing that our plans never go quite the way we want them to, today we invited 3 panelists, 3 countries really, to share their experiences in overcoming challenges in digital reform, specifically looking at their IFMIS systems. So I'm going to hand back over to Nicholas, who's going to introduce the panelists and to lead us through that discussion.
Thank you very much, Giselle. Next slide, please. So we're very excited to have 3 experts around the virtual table today, and I'll be very quickly giving them the floor through a few specific questions. So we have Henny Swanpole, or Hendrik Swanpole, sorry, I think the real name is, who's, I believe, Chief Director of Data Analysis at the Budget Office at the National Treasury of South Africa. We have Placide Mukwende, who's IFMIS Coordinator at the Ministry of Finance in Rwanda, and we have Mr Bekpon, who's Director of IT at the General Directorate of Budget at Benin. So without further ado, I will now turn to the 3 of them. Please put your cameras on, and if that's okay for you, I will start with Benin. Donc, je voulais commencer par vous, si vous êtes d'accord. La Direction générale du budget de la République du Bénin, qui a mis en place un nombre impressionnant de réformes liées au passage au digital, enfin à la digitalisation, on peut dire, des finances publiques. Et ce que je comprends, c'est que vous avez été obligé de vous adapter beaucoup, parce que vous aviez mis en place un programme qui devait se terminait en 2020, mais qui a été étendu pour différentes raisons. Parmi ces raisons, il y a eu le Covid qui a ralenti évidemment beaucoup des projets en cours. Vous appuyez aussi sur des experts internationaux d'autres pays qui ont fourni un projet de départ, mais qu'il a fallu après adapter. Et ce que je comprends, c'est que votre vision, c'est vraiment de développer un système par module, plutôt développé en interne, si je comprends bien, donc sans passer par des produits sur étagère, comme on dit, ou des produits du marché. Et vous développez module par module en vous assurant d'une règle, c'est d'avoir une seule source de données partagée avec tous pour avoir une cohérence. Je comprends que il y a eu beaucoup de réformes sous-jacentes, notamment des réformes de gouvernance. Je voudrais vous demander comment vous avez réussi ça et quelles sont les mesures que vous avez mises en place par rapport à tous ces difficultés que vous avez rencontrées par rapport à votre plan initial qui a dû être mis en cause. La parole est à vous.
OK, merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous. J'espère que vous me recevez.
Je vous entends très bien.
OK, je voudrais saluer la présence de monsieur le directeur général du budget, République du Bénin, Rodrigue Tchao, qui est en ligne, qui d'abord a eu l'insigne privilège de mettre cette réforme qu'il suit quotidiennement jusqu'aujourd'hui. Je le salue au passage. Merci à toute l'équipe de CABRI qui s'intéresse à l'expérience de la République du Bénin. Il faut dire que notre projet a démarré en 2016 et avec un modèle de développement assisté où nous avons un partenaire que je dirais assurant la maîtrise d'œuvre et avec nous. En 2016, nous avons mis en place le projet qu'on appelle projet d'appui à la gouvernance économique, financé par l'Union européenne. C'est dans ce cadre que le projet a démarré. Et SNDI, qui est une société de développement de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, nous avons travaillé ensemble avec la SNDI sur ce projet qui, normalement, devait être lancé en 2019. Donc, avec les échanges, les va-et-vient, il y a eu un grand retard qui nous a amené jusqu'en 2020 avec l'avènement de Covid où tout a chamboulé. Il faut dire que dans la phase de 2016 à 2020 avec la SNDI, la difficulté fondamentale, c'est les différentes modifications, les différents changements au niveau des process que la SNDI ne s'offrait pas pour la prise en compte totale. Parce qu'initialement, nous avons dit que c'est une réforme nouvelle, il n'y a pas une école assez suffisamment mûre et mise en place déjà qui pourrait nous inspirer. Donc, nous allons construire ensemble et au fur et à mesure que les process métiers évoluent, la construction du système d'information devait s'adapter à cette évolution. Mais les difficultés, en tout cas, de prise en compte de ces changements ont fait que le projet a accusé de retard. Ce que construisait le partenaire aussi ne répondait pas forcément, puisque les processus métiers évoluent, mais la prise en compte informatique ne s'alignait pas forcément sur ça. Donc, avec l'arrivée de Covid, il y a des points qui sont faits à la hiérarchie qui a quand même accepté la proposition de M. le directeur général du budget qui consistait à mettre en place un nouveau cadre de gouvernance qui est le comité de gestion du système d'information et de gestion des finances publiques, ce que nous appelons CGCGFP en 2021. Donc, avec ce nouveau cadre de gouvernance, l'équipe du Bénin a été organisée, structurée, métier comme technique, pour conduire désormais la réforme et avec un suivi rigoureux quotidien qu'en fait Monsieur le directeur général du budget, nous sommes parvenus à lancer le système tel que nous voulons en 2022. Donc, nous avons basculé entièrement. Il faut dire que c'est un système construit sur une seule base de données qui intègre la dorsale budget comptabilité. Donc aujourd'hui, nous avons un seul système, une seule base de données qui gère la préparation, l'exécution et la comptabilité. C'est un système assez important, assez résilient, et contient un certain nombre de périmètres fonctionnels. Le P1 qui gère le référentiel, tout ce qui concerne le référentiel budgétaire, préparation, exécution, comptabilité. Le P2, le deuxième périmètre qui s'occupe exclusivement de la préparation du budget. Le troisième périmètre, l'exécution. Le quatrième, la comptabilité. Le cinquième périmètre s'occupe de l'intégration, de l'urbanisation un peu. Le nouveau système essaie de parler, communiquer avec les systèmes connaissent, par exemple pour intégrer les IFU, les identifiants fiscaux uniques, par exemple pour communiquer avec le système de la paie pour rapatrier les données payées, la paie effectuée sans ordonnancement préalable. Et puisque le succès a été appréciable, nous avons démarré la construction du septième périmètre qui s'occupe de la comptabilité des matières. Donc, ce périmètre aussi a été construit, achevé et lancé en juin 2023. Donc, aujourd'hui, nous avons 7 périmètres fonctionnels qui marchent sur le SIGFP et les acteurs l'utilisent sur toute l'étendue du territoire. La robustesse de ce système, en tout cas, se trouve dans sa capacité à produire des matrices de suivi en temps réel de l'exécution du budget, à pouvoir sur l'archivage de tous les actes de dépenses et aussi à offrir une fenêtre sur la gestion des avantages périodiques des fonctionnaires publics. Dans ce système, nous intégrons aussi la notion de sensibilité aux gens, au climat, aux ODD et la planification du suivi du stock. Donc aujourd'hui, dans notre système, vous avez en temps réel le stock au niveau de chaque gestionnaire, au niveau de tout le pays. Et le système se dote d'une intelligence qui est capable d'analyser le stock et d'autoriser ou d'arrêter une nouvelle commande. Et aussi, le système qui s'occupe du processus des marchés publics que nous appelons SIGMAP, puisque les engagements, la nouvelle notion de gestion budgétaire parle de consommation des AE, les autorisations d'engagement, puisque les contrats sont émis, sont signés à travers le SIGMAP, nous avons mis en place un canal, une interface applicative qui permet au SIGMAP, dès la signature d'un contrat, d'éjecter automatiquement les données dans le SIGFP pour prendre en charge le volet engagement et liquidation et paiement. En termes de perspective, bon, nous comptons quand même faire l'extension fonctionnelle de ce système parce qu'aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas encore exploité au niveau de tous les postes diplomatiques en revue du Bénin. Nous comptons étendre la fonctionnalité vers l'exploitation dans les postes diplomatiques. Ça ne va pas être si compliqué puisque déjà les départements l'exécutent. Aussi, comme perspective, il y aura l'urbanisation de tous les systèmes qui parlent de l'exécution de projets d'investissement public. Donc aujourd'hui, il y a le système qui est au niveau du ministère de la Coordination qui gère les idées de projets. Il y a un système au niveau du Bureau d'analyse et des investigations qui fait le suivi, je dirais, en temps réel de l'exécution physique et le système SIGFP qui est au milieu, qui gère l'exécution budgétaire des dépenses. Donc aujourd'hui, nous pensons mettre en place désormais une autre fonctionnalité dans SIGFP pour communiquer avec tous ces systèmes.
Les questions seront à la fin. On va faire intervenir les trois intervenants, si vous voulez bien, et on laissera la question pour la fin. Je vous remercie pour cette présentation qui est très, très claire et qui donne bien cette vision spécifique du Bénin, d'une vision par accrétion, par voilà, sédimentation, on va dire, de différents modules. Vous partez sur un périmètre et vous étendez peu à peu en ayant, comme vous l'avez dit, une revue périodique des objectifs avec les utilisateurs. Donc, je comprends que vous ajoutez peu à peu des nouvelles fonctionnalités à un cœur. C'est comme ça que je comprends que vous pilotez ce projet. Et je pense que vous êtes parti du fait qu'on part des réformes de finances publiques, des directives de réforme des finances publiques qui ont été mises en place au niveau sous-régional dans l'UMOA notamment. Et c'est effectivement important de dire, voilà, notre objectif, c'est d'être conforme à ces réformes, mais c'est aussi de revenir vers les utilisateurs en disant comment est-ce qu'on peut faire du meilleur reporting, comment on peut améliorer les choses en plus de la mise en place de ces réformes. Je crois que c'est ce que vous avez très bien décrit avec à la fois des obligations légales et réglementaires, la mise en place de la comptabilité matière, par exemple, mais aussi la mise en place de nouvelles fonctionnalités pour les utilisateurs, comme les idées de projet, par exemple, j'ai noté.
Merci.
To say it's my absolute pleasure as the Executive Secretary of CABRI to welcome you today. I think Priya had already
switch back to English now in order to turn to Mr. Henny Swanpo, who's Chief Director Data Analysis for the Data Analysis of the National Treasury, I believe, in South Africa. So, Henny, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Nicholas.
Let me just bounce on what we just said with the example of Benin. I hope you were able to hear.
Yes.
And fantastic. So we just insisted on the fact that we have to deal with the legacy systems. We don't start from scratch. No one is anymore. And what we have is an internally built bespoke system in South Africa, where you also try to build new functionalities, but you also have this long-term vision of a new system. And in many countries, we have this conflicting view of having a replacing system potentially on the long term, but having to deal with the current one that needs to evolve, because we're talking long term and we have short-term constraints. Also, if I may, I would like to ask you how you were able to deal with a specific challenge you had, where you were going through a procurement for a new system, which I believe was unsatisfactory. So you had to go back and find new ways to provide the service. And finally, one of the issues we don't often mention when we try to talk about being adaptive or iterative is we have to have an architecture, hardware, for example, that evolves too. And you mentioned to us in the preparation of this meeting that these next steps require huge investments for the whole new IFMIS scope that you're planning. So how do you make sure that this adaptive approach also implements into the hardware procurement and the architecture? Thank you, Mr. Swanpo. The floor is yours.
Nicholas, thank you very much. Now, colleagues, let me just clarify. I come into this process more as a kind of a user of the data, rather than the actual person that is responsible for making the IFMS work. We've got some of our IFMS experts here, and we've got Ms. Lindy Bodewig, who was in charge of the actual IFMS project. But I've been asked to kind of come at this from a slightly different kind of perspective. Just to give you a bit of background, we initiated our IFMS project around about 2000, and we have gone through a number of different iterations during this process, moving, anything from bespoke to best of breeds to COTS, and, various different options, different approvals, but really struggling to get the project moving. And there are a number of issues. I think in the end we settled on a kind of a COT system article that we buying over the counter. And Lindy can go into a lot of detail if anybody is interested in exactly how we arrived at that and why those decisions were taken. Currently, we are facing some procurement challenges, and therefore this whole systems implementation is hanging in the air. Now, from a user point of view and a data analysis point of view, that puts us in a very difficult position. When originally we wanted to set up databases, we were all told, wait for the IFMS, the magical thing is coming, it is going to save the world, and we will all be so happy. Now it is 20 years later, I have lost a lot of my hair in the process, and still I am using Excel. So in that sense, I think a very tough kind of a project to implement. I think some of the challenges that we need to address is that it is quite clear that what we need in government is in some sense a lot more of an onerous data requirement than what is generally provided for in a lot of the systems that are out there. And making that work in the government space is quite complicated. I think the South African process around the procurement of the system is a good example of how difficult it is to procure IT in an environment where there are very strict procurement rules and where you are working with public funds. Whenever we do that, it is, there's different reporting requirements, there's different processes to follow, and we really need to think about how that can be modernized. I think we've done some of that in our process, but the rules around this makes it quite complicated. On top of just doing the IT investment, what governments typically are faced with is that the technology that they are currently using, the legacy systems are quite old, works on old technology. Once you start modernizing and implementing new systems, it literally implies throwing out the old computers, ripping cables out of walls, and doing a complete reinstallation. And often we forget about that cost implication when it comes to rollout, and that can be quite substantive. So in addition, the issue of capacity constraints is a huge issue in government. There is no way that governments can compete with the private sector to bring the expertise on board. And this is something that we really, as a group, need to think about. How do we get how do we kind of cross that hurdle? But I think, for me, one of the key problems that we struggle with in the digitalization space is the language issue. And unfortunately for this language issue, there are no interpreters. And when I talk about the language issue, I'm actually saying that when one engages in a project like this, it's a multidisciplinary process. So you will have economists, data analysts and specialists like myself and people in your budget office. You will have the accountants and the accounting standards and the people that understand the debits and credits properly. You will have the people that actually transact on a daily basis. And then you have the technical IT specialists. And all of them must sit around a table and they must design a system specification that can end up in us developing something that is useful for everyone to implement. My experience with running through a number of those exercises is that quite often when we leave the room, we are not all on the same page and we don't understand the process in the same way. And, you know, I am not fully convinced that we have really cracked that problem internationally. And I think that is where a process like this is quite important to assist governments. Then just kind of taking a quick step back to talk about your question around the legacy systems. We all have those systems, and currently we are still running with them, and they are providing us with the information that is required. You know, interestingly enough, we have systems that are like 40 years old, if not older, that pays our salaries, that makes our payments, and you know, even with those, we are still fully PFA compliant. You know, we get high scores both for PFA in terms of the IMF requirements. We are kind of producing what we are supposed to produce from these legacy systems. I think one lesson that is important in any of these bigger reforms is that one has to keep on investing in your legacy systems until such time as you scrap them. And I think there South Africa also failed to kind of do the right thing. I think we stopped investing in those systems a long time ago, and we are seeing some, you know, cracks on the margin. There are some areas where a bit of improvement, a bit of investment would have actually given us a lot of gain in the process. So I think that is an important lesson and something that people must consider going into this process. The other thing that is important is that even though you are moving towards a fancy new spaceship in the form of a big IFMIS implementation, there is a lot of work that needs to be done before, you know, that rollout can properly happen. And that work can be done as you implement or as you develop, or if you have time beforehand, start the work and get it done and sorted beforehand. So, you know, typically things like getting your accounting rules and your business processes around that and your accounting guidelines and those kind of things in place, you know, critical to guide how your system is going to go. You know, take your decisions around cash versus accrual and who's going to go on, how you're going to consolidate your accounts, all of those kind of things. Useful to have that in you know, planned up front before you even get to the bigger systems thing. We were lucky that we've invested a lot in our chart of accounts, and with that also the formats of our budgets and reporting processes, things like program budgeting and all of that, making sure that we've got all the different kind of informational dimensions covered in moving into this project. And that is an important reform that you have to start, you know, as quickly as possible. And then with that, also think about your budget process reforms. You know, I think there are some very basic things that must be in place, and the quicker we run through them and get them sorted, you know, I think is quite important. The last thing that I quickly want to touch on is just the whole issue of the capacity constraints as well. We talk about the capacity constraint of just having the technical skills to kind of build and maintain and improve an IFMIS or whatever system it is that you are implementing, and that is a critical set of skills, and we need to think about how we bring that on board. Now, you know, in the way that governments usually do this is we run the system ourselves and we try to attract the skill. We struggle to do that. We end up outsourcing some of the work. The moment that you bring service providers on board, they come with a certain bias to the table, which could also be kind of a bad situation. I think we actually need to take a step back and completely rethink the way that we start or we procure the system in the system space. Do we really need government to actually own the hardware and software and stuff that we bring to the table, or are there ways that through PPP arrangements or the like, we can actually move things off our books, similar to a kind of a lease agreement in terms of vehicles or equipment, for example, where effectively a lot of the risk is transferred towards a service provider. So that is something that we need to kind of consider when we think about systems and procurement and how we're gonna deal with that. I think something that is also critically important in terms of capacity constraints is just thinking about how humans will interact with our system. Kind of working towards a place where we can limit the amount of human intervention in the whole transactional and reporting process. So really try and focus on areas of automation of the payments processes, automation of the invoicing processes, all of those kind of issues. And I think there's a lot of examples internationally on how those can be implemented. And I think as governments, there's a lot to be gained for us in going down that road. Nicholas, that just some thoughts from my side. I've not done a presentation. I was asked not to kind of be too formal in the way that we engage with this. Those some of the ideas, and as I said, there are the other experts around the table as well that can add on, add on to this discussion in terms of our specific IFMS project. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Henny. Yeah, that was very much what we were looking for, and many different thoughts. We will go through Q&A after that, so people will be able to react and add their views. We already have some questions in the in the webinar's conversation panel. Thanks for that. One of the things that really struck me while listening to you was we have to manage the huge expectations of these new systems and link them to the fact that requires many prerequisites, a lot of work beforehand, and sometimes we have users that say we will buy the system and it will work, and we tend to be the messenger of bad news, saying, well, actually, before we do that, we have to have, for example, a new chart of accounts, and that's not something a vendor will provide. Also, I thought you insisted on the fact that we need vendors not just to provide a system, a PFM system, but also to provide a lot of other things, to provide hardware, to provide consultancy, expertise, and we need to be clear on what we have internally and what we don't have, and that's something we don't always have a clear view on. I very much like your comment about the fact that sometimes we fail, and we all do. And if I may just share in 1 second an experience, the new law, organic law on public finance in France was voted in 2001, and the new system carrying this process was implementing in 2006, fully deployed in 2010. And the latest improvements, I mean, with improvements on a year-to-year basis. So we have to acknowledge that we fail at some point. The problem is not whether we will fail in such huge, demanding projects. The problem is how to react to those failures. How do we deal with them? So sometimes we have as you just said, a procurement that isn't successful, and we have to deal with it. It's not an if, it's a when. Thank you very much, Henny. Let me turn to Placide Mukwende before we give the floor for Q&A. Placide, I can see you. Can you hear me?
Hello, Nicolas. I can hear you very well.
Thank you very much for joining. Let's talk briefly about how Rwanda was able to deal with the unexpected in its project. So you have actually participated to a previous conference with CABRI on balancing flexibility and accountability during a crisis, and I believe this conference was a lot about how you deal with data governance in during this crisis, and it was during COVID. And I understand you, as the other panelists, was you had to change your plans because of COVID, because that, I mean, we all did, obviously, but in such a huge project, it made a huge impact, and you had to change the priorities of your project, saying basically we want to focus, if I understand well what you try to explain to me, in on how to reduce the risks for our users, and to ask them not just to scan papers, but to not produce any paper, not exchange any paper, and basically to turn from scanned documentation to actually digital processes that do not produce any paper. So you had to basically change your priorities during the project, and remove what needed to be scanned. So I'd like to ask you how you manage that, how you change the plan, basically, how if there were some resistance, which I'm sure there were, and how you manage them. And also I understand that you were able to implement these changes in the IFMIS in collaboration with the Rwanda Information Society Authority, that is providing a broader view of what we're trying to change, not just the PFM changes, digital changes, but just how we have digital process for the civil servants and for the citizens, and also foster a dialogue with the private sector on how we could get benefits from using digital processes, generally speaking, and not just in PFM. For example, the use of a national PKI in Rwanda, which goes just way beyond the PFM process. So let me hand the floor over to you, and sorry if I've been a bit long for this question.
Okay. Thank you, Nicolas. So it's a great honor to be on this webinar. So basically, to actually answer the question, I will give you the broad context of digital transformation journey that we are in, going directly to the real question. Now, in Rwanda, actually from the policy level, even the president in most of his speech is talking about digital transformation in Transform Africa and so on. And the way we have embraced this is by looking at this digital transformation as a journey of digitizing all our processes, where it's like a spectrum. On the first end of the spectrum, we have complete human doing everything. That's where we were in before 2010. Now, and we're going into the direction where robots and the computers will be doing almost everything. Now, with this digital transformation journey that we are given to us by our leaders, now it comes to policymakers like a Ministry of ICT and the Rwanda Information Society Authority that provide policy and guidance. Now, in their policies, actually, they give us different keywords. Like you find that every leader, like a Minister of ICT, talking about zero trip, zero paper, data-driven decision-making, cashless, paperless, you understand? They almost repeat them in all their speeches. Now, as somebody sitting here now in IFMIS, who is in charge of automating the finance of the government, you understand now I have the assignment on how do I translate these keywords into actual reality. Now, to do that, actually, you understand there are different drivers. the drivers may come for example, for unexpected situation like COVID. Initially, we had started with a plan to achieve cashless, and we are almost in the rollout. We had completed the rollout of cashless to almost all central government and the district, but we are remaining with the rollout to subsidiary entity like schools and so on. Now, the moment the COVID came, you understand, it was almost like a push to say you need to change. Now, while we are trying to change our system, we realize that because of COVID, we need actually quick reaction to COVID. But at the end, before that, what we did was to develop a paperless for treasury. And this paperless, initially, it was almost like just because you have got a law, which was established by the Ministry of Communication, this law of electronic transaction and use with the digital signature was in place. And we had a public key infrastructure. But you understand, changing in a system and to integrate digital signature was immediately not feasible. We said, let's start with the scanning. You do something in the system, again, for authentication, you have to scan it, print it, scan it, then upload, so that it can be transmitted to another entity without any transportation because you are in total lockdown. Now, however, at the end of the COVID, people started questioning the system. No, but you understand, you are telling us to print and scan. This is an overhead. Why should I be printing and scanning? And because of the PKI, actually, across the government, you are finding that minister, we are signing instruction to the public using digital signatures in PDF. They acquire digital certificate through on the public key infrastructure offered by RISA, and then they are signing letters. You understand? It's like the whole country is signing digitally, but you in the system, you're not signing digitally. So this becomes as some sort of force to us to change actually the IFMIS so that we can sign digitally. Now, in that context, actually, we are forced to transform the IFMIS, and now, starting with 1st July 2023, the whole IFMIS actually went digital. You don't have to print, you don't have to sign. It was a complete digital transformation using digital signatures. Now, not only that, the government had other initiative of saying, for example, we need actually to implement this digital transformation as a tool for delivering also services. Now, in delivering these services, then the government started with the initiative by looking at the four corners of service delivery. The first being, how are we delivering service to citizens? Now, the reason why the government initiated what you call the Irembo platform, it's like a gateway for citizens. You need a visa, say, to come to Rwanda. Glad for all Africans, so it's now easier to come to Rwanda. But before, if you needed a visa, you could go to Irembo and you apply for the visa. A citizen need a birth certificate. You go to Irembo, and Irembo is connected to.
Maybe you can just explain what Irembo is in a nutshell.
So Irembo, it's a platform that has been established by the government of Rwanda, actually as government to citizen platform. It's a platform to deliver service to citizens. And Irembo in Kinyarwanda means a gateway. It's a Kinyarwanda term means gateway. Now, and this gateway is the one actually providing service to citizens, wherever you are across the world. If you need a passport, even if you are living, say, in South Africa, you, as a Rwandan, you apply to Irembo. You understand it is easing the work of just the transportation, and the service is very quick. Now, apart from the citizen tool, that we also introduced the e-procurement. The e-procurement where, if you're living, say, in South Africa, you can apply, you can tender online to Rwanda tenders. Now, we also introduced the the e-recruitment and the e-examination, where applicant can apply online. So you understand these are different tools actually that the government introduced through digital transformation. Now, coming to different challenges and resistance. I can be honest by telling you, at least from an example of one person, one accountant, after introducing digital signature, he said, your IFMIS is useless. Now, and useless in the sense where we are surprised actually to understand how our IFMIS is useless. You said, oh, you know, your IFMIS, the previous IFMIS, because it was paper-based, I could be getting travel allowance to bring actually payment document to National Treasury. You understand? You bring the salary, you have a travel allowance. You bring, you say an invoice of supply X to National Treasury is travel allowance. But now, by introducing digital signature, the IFMIS is no longer giving money to this person. But on the government side, the government has saved a lot, have reduced the costs. Apart from that, also, the National Bank of Rwanda had different tellers the moment we are in cash-based economy. Now, after integrating the IFMIS with the National Bank of Rwanda, the central bank, all tellers were forced to leave actually. You understand? These are different challenges and issues actually we face. Now, coming to now the introduction of IPSAS, to complement actually what Henny told us, the issue of language. This is something we faced while automating IPSAS. You understand it's something new. Now, when it is something new, you understand even the chart of account must be revised. You had a chart of account which was cash-based. Now you need to go for accrual. When it comes to accrual, you understand even the moment you are going to automate, say, a loan amortization schedule for donor. Now, you understand the creditor has its own amortization schedule. The formulas they are using, you don't even have them. You understand? To develop an IFMIS where you can generate an amortization schedule that can match each and every creditor was actually even up to now, it's a barrier. So you understand, it's like when it comes to language gap, it's like we have tech guys and business guys. And when it comes to understanding what to do, a business guy, they say, no, you IFMIS, you are responsible for doing that because we know that formulas are there, you know, online AI is there, you can do it. But we say we come on this side. No, you are supposed to bring, say, requirements with those formulas and so on to automate that. You understand this actually language barrier is everywhere. Of course, the advantage for us we have is like, even if we get it wrong, because our IFMIS is in-house, we are able to modify. We can get it right the second time and even the third time. That's the advantage because we have IFMIS in-house. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Plessis. I think many, including Henny just before, and actually Francois too, mentioned this language problem. We in many ways, our job is to translate or to make people who speak different language understand each other. And one of the things that the systems people have is they have this ability to see that it's not going to be just the system bringing the solution. It's a collaboration between the new system and new processes and the new regulatory constraint, etc. So what we see very often when a new system is being launched is, as you were just talking about the example of this person who thought the new IFMIS was actually, the IFMIS was actually reducing its capacities. We have a new fancy system and we have less satisfaction. And that is quite common. I mean, there's actually research about that. Like Soro and Bridjolfson and Curve. I mean, it's a learning curve, and in the beginning, what we see is we have invested a lot of energy and money and time into a new system, and at the beginning, people are less satisfied, and they have, and it can be a change management issue. Obviously, they need to be trained. There's a learning curve. It can also be that on the short term, the system is actually providing less functionality, and that makes sense because we're starting systems gradually, as you just mentioned. Thank you very much for this very insightful comments on the experience. I think we will now turn to Q&A. We already have some questions in the conversation panel. I'm turning to you, Giselle, just to make sure this is we agree with that. I will now turn to the questions. Is that okay for you?
Yeah, I think we might run over a little bit, so everyone please bear with us. But I would love to open up for maybe 5 minutes of questions. I see maybe there's one Placide in the chat already that might be quite quick. Can you clarify what you mean by saying having your IFMIS in-house?
Okay, thank you, Giselle. Actually, to clarify this, in our IFMIS, actually, initially, we started an IFMIS. The moment we initiated IFMIS, we are trying to go for different options, Oracle, SAP, EPICO, and so on. Then we realized that the number of licenses and the cost of licenses and the journey we want to take is not matching, depending on our economy. It's a small economy. Now, we said, okay, let's go for in-house. In-house means have a development team sitting in the Ministry of Finance. Development team paid by the Ministry of Finance. Initially, we started with a collaboration with a company experienced in developing systems to bring its developers. Now, however, with a mandate to provide knowledge transfer to Rwandan so that they can own the source code. This model didn't work well initially. Then the government in 2014 was forced to start another version of the IFMIS. However, only owned by Rwandans. This is the IFMIS you are running. I was actually part of the engineer who are in charge of designing the system. And now the system is basically being maintained, developed by a team under the Ministry of Finance. These are employees of the Ministry of Finance responsible for developing, coding, maintaining the source code. That's what I mean by in-house. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was also a question in the panel about the Benin experience, and I understand there was an answer about having the two systems at the same time in Benin, the old one and the new one. So maybe let me turn to François Bekpon. Monsieur Bekpon, comment a été gérée cette phase de double commande?
Je peux continuer?
Oui.
Je peux? OK, merci. En termes de défis, il faut dire que nous avons coûte que coûte en tête de réussir ce projet. Et comme c'est une réforme, effectivement, il y avait la résistance. Mais nous avons mis en place un mécanisme qui a facilité rapidement, qui a contribué à dissuader la résistance, qui est quoi? Nous avons mis en place la double commande. Mais une double commande un peu contraignante. Donc, depuis l'ancien système, si vous effectuez une opération, vous êtes obligé de l'effectuer son image dans le nouveau système pour qu'on essaie de voir comment le système marche. Les acteurs ne voulant pas exploiter les deux systèmes simultanément, nous avons dû mettre en place une contrainte dans l'ancien système, de sorte que si l'ancien système détecte une nouvelle dépense, il se connecte au nouveau système de façon automatique pour vérifier s'il y a un similaire de dépenses qui est engagé et qui est à la même étape. Sinon, l'acteur est bloqué pour faire évoluer sa dépense dans le nouveau système. Donc voilà le mécanisme que nous avons mis en place qui a quand même favorisé à dissiper les questions de résistance et nous avons pu atteindre le défi. Aussi, nous avons fait beaucoup de formations pour accompagner les différents utilisateurs du système. Donc, voilà un peu ce que j'apporte aux questions, comme réponse aux questions posées. Merci.
Merci. Il y avait une question précédente qui avait été posée sur le fait que ce qui semblait clair, c'est que finalement, on a tous démarré avec un plan d'action et personne n'a respecté ce plan d'action puisqu'on a dû s'adapter à des perturbations, à des nouveaux défis, c'est ce qu'on avait dit. Alors, pour gérer ces changements des plans d'action, est-ce que vous avez mis en place une gouvernance spécifique pour revoir régulièrement les objectifs du projet, Monsieur Bekpon, sur la partie Bénin? Est-ce qu'il y avait une revue périodique des objectifs du plan d'action?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Il faut dire que le Bénin a d'abord commencé par ce qu'on appelle l'adaptation. Le premier plan, c'était d'adapter l'ancien système. Il y avait une organisation pour le faire, mais par la suite, ce plan a échoué. C'est comme ça que nous avons opté pour la refonte, totalement un nouveau système avec le partenaire CNDI. Deuxième plan, et le troisième plan maintenant, c'est le nouveau cadre de gouvernance qui est le comité de gestion du CGFP. Mais il faut dire qu'en général, nous avons en ce moment ce que nous appelons l'unité de gestion de la réforme. C'était une instance basée au ministère des Finances qui conduisait la réforme de gestion des finances publiques. Et c'est au sein de cette instance qu'il y a eu le projet d'appui à la gouvernance économique que nous appelons PAGE. Donc, c'est ce projet d'appui à la gouvernance économique qui définit au fur et à mesure la stratégie, redimensionne, remodèle et réorganise au fur et à mesure jusqu'à ce que nous ayons les résultats. Et cette unité est patronnée par le secrétaire général du ministère et secondée par le directeur général du budget et accessoirement le directeur général du Trésor. Mais il faut dire que toute la vision a été conduite quand même par le directeur général du budget qui sait là où il doit atterrir. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, and just last question to Henny. I've seen in the comments that we have someone mentioning the risk of over specification. That's Neil Cole. I'm sure you know him. Is it something that you think is a risk, Henny, over specification, because we are too confident in the fact that we can actually forecast the future?
Yeah, I think that is a critically important issue. I think quite often if you start putting users in a room and you start asking them what it is that they really want, the sky's the limit, and often we end up going down that road, because what people typically will tell you is, well, put all your specifications on the table now. Because once we have built the system and we've implemented, if we really then have to come back and make changes, it's going to be quite costly, and it's quite difficult to do, and maybe we have to re-implement some sections. So in that sense, the whole process, or the whole design process, pushes us into that space of over specifying, and once we have done that, it is kind of difficult to then kind of limit the expectations. And at the moment that, of course, when you start talking to the IT vendors and the systems people, they would want to build you whatever it is that you need. So in that sense, I think it is important that one as part of the project office or the project team that works on this, you must have a few people that really understand how government works, how the accounting processes and the reporting processes work, so that we can kind of narrow down the things that are kind of crucial to make the project run, making sure that we have the minimum legal requirements, accounting requirements, reporting requirements covered, and then kind of separate the, let me call them nice to haves, and in the process where we can then build some of that into the process. Otherwise, my experience from working through a number of specification processes is that you then end up with the spaceship, and my sense is we're just never going to be able to build it as government. So I think the Benin approach of going bits and pieces and building your system in chunks over time is quite a useful approach. As long as one can ensure that you have the kind of interoperability when the project is finalized. But managing the spec is crucial to making a project work, I think. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Henny. I think there's a difference between some of the functionalities that have to be specified and even very much in details, because otherwise you're just not compliant. That's what you're saying. And some which are the nice to haves. And I couldn't agree more. Let me hand over to Giselle, and apologize for being a bit late, but I think they were very useful insights. Thank you very much to all our panelists. Giselle?
Thanks, Nicholas, and thanks to everyone that asked questions, and especially to the panelists for sharing their insights into sort of what happened in each of those countries. I saw a few other points in the chat, so from Simon Cresswell and from Malay Shwane. Just wanted to acknowledge those, and to acknowledge Neil's comment. Really raised some interesting points around the need to really understand what the government wants to do and be specific about that, but also don't over-specify, and also the role of the IFMIS providers in driving the cost of implementing an IFMIS, where the focus is maybe more on invoicing versus on the problem solving. And that, I think, really feeds nicely into how CABRI would like to explore this work, is how do we take a more problem solving approach? So if we move to the next slide, I'm just going to give a really quick overview of what we're planning for CABRI. I'm going to skip a few slides in the interest of time. I'm going to switch to the English version of this. So we're really trying to understand, how do we encourage the cross-country learning on digital reforms and focus in on what works, right? What is the practical elements that make a digital reform work? How do we learn, say, from the Benin experience in being modular? And if we go to the next slide, we'll be looking at this in two phases. So right now we're in a 6-month scoping phase, just at the beginning of it, where we're trying to understand from countries, what is it that you need in the future to improve that learning and improve how we're implementing a digital reform. So we've done this first webinar, and thank you for joining us. Nicholas and I will then be looking at 5 specific country investigations to understand what are those practical elements that made a reform successful, not just within IFMIS, but any sort of reform that the Ministry of Finance has been involved in with using digital tools. And then we will use that to create a hypothesis for what it is that the country's needs and what we as CABRI can contribute to the space. And we'll present that hypothesis within webinar 2 to get feedback, to encourage that co-creation of phase 2, which at the moment we're keeping it broad. What phase 2 will look like. It could be, for example, using some of CABRI's usual learning tools, such as a policy dialogue or a capacity building program, the BPFC, or it could be, for example, a dashboard of what the digital footprint looks like in Africa, who has done what well, and finding ways to share on an online forum. So please keep coming back, giving us suggestions and feedback, so that we end up in that phase 2 with the thing that will help unlock maybe some of these questions and some of these insights. If we go to the next slide, the country investigations are really trying to understand what makes a reform work and get into some of this nitty-gritty details. So, for example, things that were raised by the panelists around the capacity in government, and how do you make sure the right people are on the team that are implementing and using the IFMIS program, or the digital program, even broad beyond IFMIS. The issue around language. So in getting the governance right, we also want to think, how do we improve that sharing of language between the software developers and the budget officials, and even the subnational level government structures. So we currently have started thinking about these 6 elements that we would look at in the country case studies, and following the feedback that we've gotten today and any future feedback we get, we might add some more. But so it's looking at, how do you define those functional improvements that you're trying to achieve? So how do we be clear, what are we trying to do with this digital reform? How are we taking an adaptive approach, and what's worked within that? How do we set up the governance so that you're not just consulting, but you're really engaging with different parts of the government and designing the system well according to that, ensuring that that data is translated using tools into decision making, so we're not just collecting data, but we're using the data well, improving that data quality. And then finally, I think really importantly, as was identified in the chat, building in that expertise and in-house capabilities. So the idea would be, through these country investigations, to try and understand which of these elements are sort of the most important, the ones that we're struggling with the most, and also maybe where there are examples for how this has worked well. And then next slide, just as a reminder, we're not just looking at IFMIS in this, we're actually looking at any digital reform that's being done by the ministries of finance. And so we do encourage you to think about, if you do want to participate in those country investigations, if there's other examples, such as how line ministry M&E data is incorporated into the budgeting process, might be another one, or how technology is being used to reach citizens more, so engage with citizens within the budgeting process. So we are taking a very broad view of this work, and not just focusing on that small IFMIS or smaller IFMIS circle. And then last slide from me. So just a request to join us. So as Dr. Kay Brown mentioned in the beginning, we're really trying to co-design and collaborate on this work. And we want to make sure that that phase 2 is responsive to your needs. So if you have suggestions for potentially like challenges or key issues that you'd like for this work to look into that weren't discussed today, please let me know. I'll put my email in the chat. Or if you're interested in being part of those country investigations where we look into your one example of a reform that you've done and try and understand, okay, what were the important points and what can we learn from you? Both of those things would be very valued. So I'll put my email in the chat and you can follow up with me afterwards. I'm going to end there and just maybe pass on to Dr. Kay Brown for a final thank you and release you all from this, this meeting. Over to you, Kay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Mine is just to formally thank you. I think if we take a metaphor from here, if we were talking about IFMIS as being the spaceship, now we're talking about the whole PFM arena. So we're talking about the universe and all of the spaceships, but we will hope to do so in a very systematic way. And as Giselle has invited, please do contact us with any of the initiatives that you have had and have been successful at in terms of digitalization, digitization, even with regard, or not even, but importantly, with regard to the key decision makers and keeping everyone satisfied with the kind of results that one has got in the end. We also do want to hear about some of the challenges. So please do contact us. And thank you very much formally to everyone, panelists, and every single participant. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Au revoir.
Bye-bye.